The chamber breathed with ancient power. That was Ambassador Elena Vasquez's first thought, as the translucent doors dissolved before her, revealing a space so vast, it seemed to curve with the weight of its own history. Crystalline pillars rose like frozen lightning strikes toward a ceiling that displayed not sky, but the slow wheeling of distant galaxies, their light bent and filtered through technologies she couldn't begin to comprehend. She had been a diplomat for 17 years, had negotiated ceasefires in war zones where the air tasted of cordite and desperation, had sat across tables from men who would have gladly ordered her death. None of it had prepared her for this. The summons had come 3 days ago, delivered not by courier or encrypted transmission, but by a shift in reality itself. She had been in her apartment in Geneva, reviewing agricultural trade agreements over morning coffee, when the walls simply opened. A figure had stood there, neither threatening nor comforting, its form suggesting humanoid shape the way a sketch suggests a portrait. It spoke without sound directly into her mind, and the weight of its message nearly drove her to her knees. Earth was known, had always been known. The isolation humanity believed was the natural state of the universe. The silence that had prompted centuries of wondering if they were alone had been a deliberate act of concealment. And now, for reasons the being would not or could not explain, that concealment was ending. She had 72 hours to prepare. 72 hours to absorb the existence of a galactic federation spanning 300,000 inhabited worlds, to learn the basics of 6 major factions whose enmities predated human civilization by millennia. To understand that she was being thrown into the center of a crisis that could ignite wars across star systems, like matches struck in a drought-dried forest. They gave her no authority, no briefing materials, no support staff, just a neural interface that downloaded languages and cultural contexts directly into her consciousness, with a sensation like drowning in ice water, and a simple explanation that chilled her more than any threat. Earth's sudden revelation was the only leverage they had. The factions needed to believe humanity represented an unknown variable, a potential ally or threat whose allegiances remained unmapped. And she was the only human who knew any of this existed. Now she stood in the Council of Manifest Spheres, and 6 alien civilizations turned their attention toward her, like searchlights finding prey. The Kethri delegation occupied the eastern quarter of the chamber, their forms insectoid and elegant, chitinous armor gleaming with oil-slick iridescence. They had been the first to greet her, if greet was the word for the complex series of pheromone releases and mandible clicks that her interface translated as cautious welcome, tinged with suspicion. The Kethri Dominion controlled 17% of the known galaxy's habitable worlds, and their military doctrine, she had learned during those desperate 72 hours, centered on overwhelming first strikes. They did not believe in proportional response. To the west, the luminarchs of the Velkan ascendancy arranged themselves in a configuration that suggested hierarchy even to human eyes. Tall, wreathed in what appeared to be contained plasma, they regarded her with expressions she couldn't read but felt as pressure against her thoughts. The Velkan had pioneered the Federation's founding principles 3,000 years ago, had written the treaties that bound 300,000 worlds in fragile peace. They were philosophers, scientists, arbiters of cosmic law. They were also, according to fragments she'd gleaned from her interface, quietly desperate to maintain their eroding influence. The SAR Collective filled the southern arc with what looked like a living nebula, individual forms drifting in and out of coherence within a cloud of bioluminescent gas. They communicated through light and chemical signals, their thoughts emerging from consensus rather than individuals, and Elena found them simultaneously beautiful and profoundly unsettling. The SAR controlled the largest reserve deposits of Kaelon crystal in the known galaxy, the resource that powered faster than light travel and enabled civilizations to span the stars. They had used this monopoly to become the Federation's beating heart. Everyone needed the SAR. Everyone resented needing them. 3 other factions rounded out the council. The crystalline architects who processed reality through mathematics, Elena's brain couldn't hold without her interface threatening to overheat. The Varani warrior clans whose culture treated diplomacy as ritualized warfare, and the Murmur, whose very existence seemed uncertain, flickering at the edges of perception like afterimages. Each commanded fleets that could sterilize worlds. Each had reasons to fear the others. And each, Elena had been warned, suspected the others of secretly arming insurgent groups in the disputed zones. The war hadn't started yet, but everyone could smell it coming. Ambassador Vasquez. The Vulcan High Luminary's voice resonated in her mind with crystalline precision. Your presence constitutes an irregularity. Humanity was not granted Confederation status. The protocols for species elevation are explicit and unbending. Yet you stand here, summoned by emergency session, under circumstances that remain opaque. Elena felt the weight of their attention like gravity. In the brief silence that followed, she understood with perfect clarity that her first words would set trajectories from which there could be no deviation. She thought of her daughter, 9 years old, probably in school right now, learning about the solar system in blissful ignorance that it existed within a galaxy teeming with civilizations who had deliberately hidden themselves from humanity's view. She thought of the 8 billion souls on Earth who would wake tomorrow with no idea how close they stood to annihilation or transcendence. High Luminary, she began, keeping her voice steady though her heart hammered. I am here because you require an outsider, someone with no stake in your ancient grievances, someone who cannot be threatened by your history because they know nothing of it. She paused, let that sink in. You're facing a crisis that normal channels cannot resolve, so you reached for the unorthodox. You reached for us. It was a gamble. She had no proof of any of this. But the Vulcan's plasma-wreathed form flickered. Surprise? Acknowledgement? And she felt the attention of the other delegations shift fractionally in her favor. The Kethrai emissary clicked forward, movements sharp and aggressive. The frontier colony of Kashan 3 was destroyed 6 cycles ago. 3 million Kethrai dead. We have evidence, irrefutable evidence, that SAR bioweapons were deployed. The chemical signature is unmistakable. The SAR collective pulsed with colors Elena's interface translated as outrage and grief. Lies, fabrications. Our people maintain Kalon mining stations in that sector. We had 2,000 workers in system. They died with your colonists. This is Vorania provocation, a false banner attack designed to turn us against each other while they seize the disputed territories. We seize nothing. The Varani war leader's voice was like grinding stone. But we will not stand idle while others blame us for their own failures. If the Kethrai cannot protect their worlds, perhaps they should not have spread so thin across the frontier. Elena watched the chamber begin to fracture, fault lines of ancient hatred spreading beneath the surface of diplomatic language. This was how wars started, not with dramatic declarations, but with cascading accusations, each side convinced of its righteousness, each possessed of evidence that seemed irrefutable. Show me the evidence, she said, cutting through the rising tension. 6 factions turned toward her with surprise that registered even across the vast gulf of biochemistry and consciousness. You are unqualified to evaluate, the Vulcan began. Exactly, Elena interrupted, and felt a thrill of terror at her own audacity. I'm unqualified, untrained. I have no forensic expertise in your technologies, and no knowledge of your military capabilities. Which means I can't be influenced by assumptions about what each of you can or cannot do. Show me everything. Let me be your impossible witness. The Kethrai emissary's mandibles worked in what might have been consideration. An interesting proposition, the primitive perspective as objective arbiter. The words dripped with condescension, but Elena heard the calculation beneath. They thought she would confirm their accusations. They thought they could control her interpretation. The human proposes herself as neutral investigator, the Luminarch mused. Unprecedented, potentially destabilizing to established protocols. But these are not established times. The plasma flickered with colors Elena couldn't name. We accept, but understand, Ambassador, if you fail to identify the perpetrators, or if you attempt to obscure the truth, your species' introduction to the Federation will be complicated. It was not a threat. It was a promise. And Elena understood in that moment that Earth's emergence into galactic awareness was not the benevolent revelation it might have seemed. It was leverage, pure and simple. She was a pawn in a game whose rules had been written before her ancestors climbed down from trees. They gave her access to everything: sensor logs from Cashin 3, metabolic analyses of the bioweapon residue, communications intercepts, intelligence assessments, supply chain records for Kalan crystal distribution, military deployment patterns, trade routes and tariff disputes, and 1,000 other data points that painted a portrait of a federation held together by necessity and habit, fraying at every seam. Elena worked alone in a chamber they provided, its walls displaying data in three-dimensional cascades that would have been incomprehensible without her interface. She slept in 4-hour increments, dreamed of her daughter's face overlaid with star charts, woke with her mind buzzing with information that felt both native and foreign. The evidence was perfect. That was the problem. The bioweapon residue on Cashin 3 matched Sire organic signatures with impossible precision. The chemical markers, the genetic sequences, even the deployment mechanism, everything pointed to SAR technology. But as Elena traced back through the supply chains and manufacturing records, she found something that made her blood run cold. The Kalan crystals powering Cashin 3's orbital defenses had been replaced 6 months before the attack. Routine maintenance, authorized through proper channels, performed by certified technicians. But the replacement crystals had come from a batch that showed microscopic irregularities in their atomic structure. Flaws so subtle they wouldn't affect power generation, but would leave distinctive traces in sensor logs. Someone had poisoned the evidence, not the colony, the evidence itself. She spent 3 days tracing the distribution chain for those flawed crystals. It led through SAR mining operations, yes, but also through Kethrai shipping manifests, and Vorani security checkpoints, and Velkan administrative oversight. The crystals had passed through all of them, touched by all of them, modified by none, and all of them simultaneously. The attack on Cashin 3 had been real. 3 million dead was not a fiction. But the evidence trail had been carefully cultivated to ensure that every major faction had both motive and opportunity. Someone wanted war. Someone wanted the Federation to tear itself apart. And they had been planning it for years. Elena sat in the dim chamber, surrounded by data that felt like chains, and understood that she had discovered something far more dangerous than a simple conspiracy. She called for another council session. They assembled with predatory eagerness, each faction confident she would confirm their accusations. Elena stood before them and felt the weight of worlds pressing down on her shoulders. "The evidence has been manufactured," she said. "Not the attack itself, that was horrifyingly real. But the trail that points to the SAR is a construction. Someone wanted you to reach exactly these conclusions." The chamber erupted. Accusations flew like weapons. The Kethrai insisted she was being manipulated. The SAR demanded to know who had framed them. The Vorani suggested she was an agent of chaos deliberately sowing confusion. "Who?" the Velkan Luminarch demanded, and the plasma wreathing their form burned with intensity that made Elena's eyes water. "If the evidence was manufactured, identify the manufacturer. Give us the true culprit." And Elena hesitated. Because in those 3 days of investigation, following threads that wound through centuries of galactic politics, she had discovered something else. Something that made the conspiracy to start a war seem almost trivial by comparison. The Kalan crystals weren't just a resource. They were alive. Not sentient exactly. Not conscious in any way she could articulate. But they were biological in origin, grown rather than mined, and the Ser hadn't discovered them. They had been given them 3,000 years ago by the Vulcan Ascendancy as part of the founding treaty that established the Federation. The Vulcan had engineered the crystals, had designed them to be indispensable, to create dependency, to ensure that no civilization could pursue interstellar expansion without Vulcan approval. The entire Federation, 300,000 worlds, trillions of beings, millennia of history, had been built on a foundation of calculated control. And someone had discovered this. Someone had found proof that the enlightened Vulcan, the philosophers and lawgivers, had architected a trap for every species in the galaxy. The conspiracy to start a war wasn't random chaos. It was a desperate attempt to shatter a system that had been rotten from its inception. Elena stood in that chamber and felt the weight of impossible choices. She could expose the Vulcan, reveal that the Federation's founding was based on manipulation and control. The revelation would destroy whatever fragile trust still existed, would shatter the political order, might ignite the very wars she had been brought here to prevent. Millions would die, billions perhaps. Or she could lie. She could identify a convenient culprit, perhaps one of the fringe factions, someone with minimal support, whose sacrifice would satisfy the hunger for justice without toppling the broader structure. She could preserve the Federation by burying the truth. She could save lives by perpetuating the very deception that had made those lives possible. The manufacturer, Elena said slowly, is difficult to identify with certainty. She saw calculation flash across the Vulcan Luminarch's face. Relief, perhaps, or recognition that she understood more than she was saying. The Kethrai emissary clicked in frustration. The Tsar Collective pulsed with agitation. Then your investigation is incomplete, the Varanii war leader rumbled. We return to our original positions. The evidence stands. The Tsar must answer for Cashin 3. Unless, Elena said, and heard her own voice as if from a distance. We acknowledge that the evidence trail has been compromised, and recognize that acting on it would serve someone else's agenda. The real question isn't who attacked Cashin 3. It's who benefits from the Federation tearing itself apart. Everyone benefits, the architect delegate chimed, its voice like crystal resonating through her bones. Every faction gains territory, resources, influence. War is profitable for the victors. Is it? Elena moved through the chamber, feeling the attention follow her like physical force. You all have enough firepower to sterilize worlds. If you go to war, mutually assured destruction isn't a theory, it's a mathematical certainty. No one benefits from that. Which means whoever orchestrated this isn't trying to start a war they can win. They're trying to expose a deeper problem. Silence fell across the council. In that silence, Elena felt the edges of understanding ripple through the assembled civilizations. What problem? The Luminarch asked, and there was something in their tone, not quite fear, but a recognition that they stood at a precipice. Elena took a breath. The Kalan crystals. Someone has discovered something about their origin. Something that calls into question the entire foundation of the Federation. She did not look at the Vulcan as she spoke. She kept her gaze moving, including all of them, making this about collective history rather than individual guilt. 3,000 years ago, when this Federation was founded, certain choices were made. Certain systems were put in place. Those systems created stability. They enabled cooperation across impossible distances and incomprehensible differences. They worked, but they were not neutral. They were not unbiased. And someone wants that truth revealed, even if the revelation destroys everything. The Luminarch's form flickered with colors Elena had never seen before. When they spoke, their voice carried harmonics that made her teeth ache. What are you proposing, Ambassador? A choice, Elena said. You can investigate further. You can dig into the historical records and the engineering specifications and the treaties that established Kalan crystal distribution. You can uncover every secret and expose every manipulation. You can have truth, or you can recognize that some truths are weapons, and that deploying them causes more harm than the initial deception. You counsel ignorance? The Kethri emissary's mandibles clicked with agitation. You suggest we blind ourselves? I counsel wisdom, Elena replied. I counsel recognizing that the Federation, whatever its flaws, has kept you from destroying each other for 3,000 years. Yes, it was built on manipulation. Yes, the power dynamics favor some over others. But the alternative is war. Not hypothetical war. Not possible war. War right now, in this moment, because the evidence that would trigger it is sitting in your data cores waiting to be believed. She turned to face them all, these ancient civilizations with their vast knowledge and terrible power. Someone planted false evidence hoping you would tear each other apart. They succeeded in making you suspicious, in eroding trust, in creating the conditions for war. But they failed in one crucial aspect. They didn't account for someone from the outside, someone with no stake in your history, pointing out that you're being manipulated. The Varanii war leader stepped forward, massive and scarred. And the deeper truth? The Kalon crystals? What do you propose we do with that knowledge? Elena met their gaze, if gaze was the right word for the burning intensity of their focus. You already know about it, all of you, or you suspect it. The question is whether you choose to weaponize that knowledge, or whether you choose to acknowledge that the system, however flawed, serves a purpose. You can tear down the structure and rebuild from rubble, or you can reform it. Gradually, carefully, without burning the galaxy in the process. Reform requires admission of guilt, the Luminarch said quietly. It requires those who engineered the original system to acknowledge their manipulation. Yes, Elena said simply, it does. The chamber fell silent. In that silence, Elena felt the weight of civilizations older than human language considering options that would ripple across star systems. She thought of her daughter again, safe in a classroom on a world that had no idea how close it had come to being caught in the crossfire of galactic war. The Luminarch's form shifted, colors rippling through the plasma in patterns that reminded Elena of grief. When they spoke, their voice carried less authority, more vulnerability. We engineered the Kalon crystals, they said. We designed them to be indispensable. We did this because we believed, still believe, that cooperation enforced through dependency is preferable to the chaos of absolute autonomy. We have spent 3,000 years convinced we made the right choice. That our manipulation saved trillions of lives that would have been lost to war. They paused, and the other delegations watched with intensity that bordered on violence. We were not wrong, the Luminarch continued. But we were not fully right, and the Ambassador has identified a truth we have avoided. That a system built on hidden control cannot stand forever. Eventually, someone discovers the mechanism. Eventually, the manipulation becomes the greater threat than the chaos it prevented. The SAR collective pulsed with colors that Elena's interface translated as vindication tinged with sympathy. You admit culpability, you acknowledge the deception. We do, the Luminarch said. And we propose reformation, gradual, transparent, a transition from dependency to genuine cooperation. It will take decades, perhaps centuries. But the alternative is the war we all face if we allow this moment to fracture us. Elena watched alliances shift in real time, saw the council members recalibrate their positions, their calculations. The Kethri emissary clicked thoughtfully. The Varanii war leader gave a gesture, Elena's interface translated as grudging respect. Even the flickering murmur seemed to coalesce into something approaching agreement. And the perpetrator? The architect asked. The one who planted the false evidence, who tried to weaponize this truth? Do they go unpunished? They go unidentified, Elena said. Because identifying them would mean revealing exactly what they wanted revealed. We don't give them martyrdom. We don't give them the satisfaction of having their exposure trigger the chaos they desired. We deny them their victory. It was not justice. It was expedient. It was compromise in the face of impossible stakes. And it left a bitter taste in Elena's mouth, even as she recognized its necessity. The council deliberated for hours after that. Elena was dismissed from the chamber, sent to wait in a smaller room where the walls showed distant nebulae and colors no human eye had ever seen. She sat in silence and felt the enormity of what she had done, what she had prevented, what she had enabled. She had saved the Federation. She had also helped bury a truth that deserved exposure. She had prevented genocide and perpetuated injustice. The moral calculus made her head spin, made her question every ethical framework she had built her career upon. When they finally summoned her back, the Vulcan Luminarch spoke for all of them. Your species will be granted preliminary Confederation status. You will have access to Federation technologies, trade networks, and diplomatic channels. But there are conditions. Earth will be monitored. Your development will be guided, and you, Ambassador, will remain as your species representative. Elena understood immediately. She would not be going home. She would not see her daughter grow up except through transmissions across impossible distances. She had become leverage in a new game, a hostage to ensure Earth's compliance, a symbol of humanity's entanglement with forces they barely understood. I accept, she said, because what else could she say? You demonstrated wisdom today, the Luminarch continued. You chose stability over truth, order over justice. These are difficult choices. They carry weight. You will live with that weight for the rest of your life. I know, Elena said, and she did. They provided her with quarters in a station orbiting the capital world of the Vulcan Ascendancy. She had a window that looked out on a sun that wasn't Sol, planets that weren't Earth. She sent a message to her daughter, carefully worded, explaining that Mommy had to stay away for work, that she loved her, that she would come home someday, even though Elena knew that day might never arrive. That night, if night was the right word for the artificial cycle the station maintained, Elena stood at her window and watched the ships of the Federation move through the orbital lanes like blood cells through veins. She thought about the choice she had made, the truth she had helped bury, the lives she had saved by perpetuating a system built on manipulation. There were no good answers. She understood that now with bone-deep certainty. The universe was too large, too complex, too full of competing interests and ancient grievances for simple morality to function. She had chosen the lesser evil. She had chosen survival over righteousness. And she would spend the rest of her life wondering if she had been right. Somewhere in the station's data cores, the evidence of the Vulcan's manipulation remained. Encrypted, classified, but not destroyed. Because truth, once discovered, could not be entirely erased. It could only be contained, managed, controlled. And sooner or later, in decades or centuries, someone else would find it. Someone else would face the same impossible choice. Would they choose as she had chosen? Would they bury the truth to preserve stability? Or would they burn the galaxy down for the sake of honesty? Elena pressed her hand against the window, feeling the coolness of material that wasn't glass, looking out at stars that suddenly seemed less like beacons of hope, and more like witnesses to her compromise. She thought of her daughter's face, thought of the 8 billion humans who would join the Federation, not as equals but as managed participants in a system designed to control them. Thought of the 3 million Kethrai who had died on Cashin 3, and whose killer would never be identified, because identification would require revelations the Federation couldn't survive. She had saved the galaxy. She had betrayed every principle she claimed to hold. And she would live with that contradiction until the day she died, neither fully hero nor villain, just a negotiator who had gambled with truth and chosen power's longer game. In the end, that was what diplomacy always required. Not the courage to act, but the courage to compromise. Not the strength to fight, but the strength to endure the weight of choices that had no right answer. She was humanity's representative in a federation built on lies. She was the guardian of a secret that could end civilizations. She was a mother who would never tuck her daughter into bed again. She was Ambassador Elena Vasquez. And she would play the hand she had been dealt, because the alternative was watching the galaxy burn. The stars wheeled overhead, cold and distant and uncaring, and Elena stood watch in the darkness, waiting for the next crisis, the next impossible choice, the next moment when truth and survival would war in her conscience, and she would have to decide again which one to sacrifice on the altar of the greater good. Outside her window, a ship passed. Then another. The machinery of the Federation turning, grinding forward, held together by necessity and habit, and the carefully maintained ignorance of billions who trusted that their leaders knew what they were doing. Elena watched, and waited, and tried not to think about what she had become.